The offering. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had never seen anything so beautiful as the Citadel of Voices, and she had never felt so small in her entire life. The massive structure floated in the void between three dying stars, its crystalline spires reaching upward like the fingers of some ancient god trying to touch the heavens themselves. She straightened her uniform and took a deep breath as the shuttle descended toward the docking platform. Humanity had waited 32 years for this moment, and Elena carried the hopes of 8 billion souls on her shoulders. Earth had joined the Galactic Concord as a junior member 3 decades ago, and since then, her people had done everything right. They had shared their medical technology freely with species who had none. They had sent soldiers to fight in peacekeeping missions on worlds they had never heard of. They had opened their borders to refugees from dying planets and welcomed them as brothers and sisters. Now the Council of 12 had summoned Earth's delegation to the sacred Citadel, and everyone back home believed this was the moment humanity would finally be recognized as equals among the stars. The great chamber was circular and vast beyond comprehension. 12 platforms floated in the darkness, each one holding the holographic projection of a council member. These were the eldest species in the known galaxy, beings who had mastered space travel when humanity was still learning to make fire. Their forms towered over Elena, some humanoid and others so alien that her mind struggled to process their shapes. Ambassador Vasquez of Earth, the Archon of the Velanthi Dominion, spoke first, his serpentine form coiling and uncoiling in the projection. His voice was silk wrapped around steel. "We thank you for answering our summons." Elena bowed respectfully. "The honor is ours, Archon. Humanity is grateful for the opportunity to address this august body." The council members exchanged glances that Elena could not read. She felt a chill run down her spine but pushed the feeling aside. This was supposed to be a celebration, a recognition of everything her people had accomplished. "We have watched humanity with great interest," the Archon continued. "Your species has proven remarkably adaptable. You have contributed much to the Concord in your brief membership." "We have tried to be worthy partners," Elena replied, her heart swelling with pride. "Earth believes in the values of the Concord: cooperation, mutual defense, and the pursuit of peace for all species." "Indeed," another council member spoke, a massive crystalline being called the Hierophant of the Shimmering Depths. "It is because of these qualities that we have selected humanity for a great honor." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. This was it. This was the moment Earth had dreamed of. "As you know," the Archon said, his tone unchanged, "the Drakhari swarm has been expanding aggressively along the outer rim. Their hunger for new worlds threatens the stability of the entire quadrant." Elena nodded. She had read the intelligence reports. The Drakhari were a hive species, billions of insected creatures that consumed entire ecosystems to fuel their endless reproduction. They had destroyed 17 inhabited worlds in the past decade alone. "After much deliberation," the Archon continued, "the Council has reached an agreement with the Drakhari leadership. In exchange for a century of peace along the outer rim, we will offer them a suitable resettlement territory." Something cold began to form in Elena's stomach. "That sounds like a reasonable diplomatic solution, Archon. How can Earth assist?" The chamber fell silent. The holographic forms of the council members seemed to grow larger, more imposing. Elena suddenly felt like prey surrounded by predators. "You misunderstand, Ambassador," the Archon said, and there was no warmth in his voice now. "Earth is the resettlement territory." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her mind refusing to process what she had just heard. "The Drakhari will be given full sovereignty over the Sol system," the Hierophant added. "Your species will be relocated to designated reserve worlds on the galactic fringe." "You cannot be serious," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. 8 billion people live on Earth. It is our home, our only home." Sacrifices must be made for the greater good, the Archon replied. Humanity is young. You have existed for merely a cosmic heartbeat. Your genetic material will be preserved in the conquered archives. Your culture will be remembered. Remembered? Elena's shock transformed into something else, something hot and sharp. You are talking about genocide. You are talking about feeding our world to monsters. We are talking about peace, another council member interjected, a being of pure energy that pulsed with cold light. The Drakhari threaten trillions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Humanity numbers in mere billions. The mathematics are simple. Elena looked around the chamber, searching for any sign of dissent, any ally among the 12 ancient species. She found none. Their faces, those that had faces, showed nothing but calm acceptance. You used us, she realized. All those peacekeeping missions, all those refugee programs, you were testing us. You were measuring our worth. We were determining your expendability, the Archon corrected. And you passed. You are young enough that your loss will not destabilize the conquered, adaptable enough that some of your people may survive relocation, unremarkable enough that no one will object. Elena reached for her communication device. She had to warn Earth. She had to tell them what was happening, but her hand found only static where the signal should have been. Your transmission capabilities have been disabled, the Hierophant explained. Conquered fleets are already moving to blockade your system. Resistance is not merely futile, it is impossible. Accept your fate with the dignity befitting a sentient species. Elena stood alone in that vast chamber, surrounded by beings who had decided her entire species was nothing more than a bargaining chip. She thought of her daughter back home, of her elderly parents, of the billions of faces she would never see again. History will remember this, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Whatever you think you have accomplished here, history will remember what you truly are. The Archon made a sound that might have been laughter. History is written by survivors, ambassador, and your people will not be among them. The council dismissed her without another word. Guards escorted her back to the shuttle, back to the transport that would return her to a homeworld that had already been sold to monsters. Elena did not know that her message had been partially received before the jamming began. She did not know that fragments of the Council's betrayal had reached Earth. She did not know that across her homeworld, billions of humans were learning the truth at that very moment. What Elena Vasquez could not have predicted, what the Council of 12 could never have imagined, was the silence that followed. Earth did not scream. Earth did not beg. Earth did not cry out for mercy or justice or divine intervention. Earth simply went quiet, and in that silence something began to change. The Conquered's blockade fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find chaos and panic. They found only darkness and electromagnetic interference so dense that their sensors were useless. They reported that humanity was likely destroying itself in civil war. They were wrong. In shipyards hidden beneath the surfaces of moons and in orbital stations cloaked by technology the Conquered had never seen, humanity had already begun to build. Not with hope, not with prayers, but with cold and terrible purpose. The Council believed they had condemned a primitive species to extinction. They had no way of knowing they had just awakened something far more dangerous than the Drakhari swarm had ever been. They had made an enemy of humanity, and humanity had a very long memory indeed. The Dark Decade. 10 years of silence had passed since the betrayal, and the galaxy had almost forgotten about the small blue world at the edge of the Orion Arm. The Conquered's blockade fleet still maintained its position around the Sol system, but the crews had grown lazy and bored. They played games and complained about their assignment and wondered why they were still guarding a dead civilization. Commander Thexrel of the Valanthe patrol cruiser Sovereign Wind wrote in his personal log that this was the most pointless assignment in the entire fleet. His sensors showed nothing but electromagnetic chaos whenever they tried to scan the inner system. His superiors told him this was evidence of humanity tearing itself apart in civil war. He believed them because he had no reason not to. Inside the shroud, the truth was something else entirely. Admiral Kenji Morrow stood on the observation deck of the orbital station designated Forge 7 and watched as another dreadnought rolled off the assembly line. The massive vessel was painted black, so dark that it seemed to swallow the light around it. It bore no name yet. Names would come later, when there was time for such things. "How many does that make?" General Saracen asked, stepping up beside him. 412 capital ships, Morrow replied without looking away from the viewport. 783 support vessels, over 12,000 fighter and bomber craft, and we are still building. Chen shook her head in amazement. 10 years ago, we could barely field 100 patrol boats. 10 years ago, we trusted others to protect us, Morrow said, and his voice carried a weight that made Chen's chest tight. We will never make that mistake again. Kenji Morrow had been a young captain when the betrayal happened. He had believed in the Concord's ideals. He had served on joint missions with alien species and called some of them friends. He had argued passionately that humanity's future lay in cooperation and diplomacy. The Council had murdered that version of him. The man who stood here now was something colder, harder, forged in the same fires that built these ships. Across Earth and every moon and station in the solar system, humanity worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. Factories ran day and night. Children grew up learning the names and faces of the 12 who had betrayed them. Schools taught a new history, one that began with the offering and ended with a promise. The promise that humanity would never again kneel before anyone. The United Earth government, which had been fractured by politics and nationalism for centuries, unified under a single doctrine called the Iron Covenant. Its principles were simple and absolute. First, Earth would never again depend on others for its survival. Second, the betrayal would never be forgotten. Third, when the time came, justice would be delivered. Scientists who had once competed with each other now shared their research freely. Engineers who had worked for different nations now labored side by side. Soldiers trained in methods of warfare that the galaxy had never seen. Humanity had learned something terrible about itself in those dark years. They had learned that when pushed to the brink of extinction, they could become something magnificent and terrifying. Dr. Maya Okonkwo led the team that developed the Shroud technology, the electromagnetic barrier that hid all of humanity's activities from Concord sensors. She had been a theoretical physicist before the betrayal, interested only in the abstract beauty of mathematics. Now, she designed weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. "Do you ever feel guilty?" her assistant asked her one night as they worked on a new targeting system. Maya looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "I feel guilty that we were not ready before. I feel guilty that we trusted them. I feel guilty that my children will grow up knowing nothing but preparation for war, but guilt for what we are building. No, never. This is survival, and survival is not a sin." Across the solar system, similar conversations played out in 1,000 different forms. Humanity wrestled with what it was becoming. Some people worried that they were losing their souls in the darkness. Others argued that they had no choice. A few simply embraced the transformation and welcomed the cold efficiency it brought. Admiral Morrow thought about these questions often, usually in the quiet hours of the night cycle when sleep refused to come. He remembered the old humanity, the one that had reached for the stars with open hands and hearts full of wonder. That humanity was dead now, killed by the Council's betrayal. What was being born in its place was something different. He called the fleet the Black Armada, and he designed it for one purpose only, not exploration, not defense, not diplomacy. The Black Armada existed to deliver a message written in fire and blood, a message that would echo through the galaxy for 1,000 generations. The children of Earth grew up hard and focused. They played war games instead of pretend adventures. They studied alien biology and learned the weaknesses of every council species. They memorized star charts and tactical formations before they learned poetry. It was a childhood without innocence, but innocence was a luxury that humanity could no longer afford. Young Lieutenant James Ockhaffer was 7 years old when the betrayal happened. He remembered watching his mother cry as the news spread across the networks. He remembered asking why the aliens wanted to hurt them, and he remembered that no one could give him an answer that made sense. Now he was 17 and one of the most promising pilots in the fleet. His reflexes were sharp and his aim was perfect and his heart was cold. When he climbed into the cockpit of his fighter, he did not think about glory or adventure. He thought about the council chamber where humanity had been condemned. He thought about the Archon's words, delivered with such casual cruelty. He thought about what it would feel like to watch that serpent burn. The 10th anniversary of the betrayal approached, and humanity prepared for what they called the unveiling. The shroud would drop, and the galaxy would see what they had created. Admiral Morrow gathered his senior officers for a final briefing. "They think we are dead," he told them. "They think we destroyed ourselves in despair and chaos. They have forgotten about us if they ever truly remembered. Tomorrow we will remind them." "What are our orders, Admiral?" General Chen asked. Morrow's face was stone. "First, we eliminate the Drakhari swarm. Every hive, every breeding world, every last insect that ever dreamed of consuming our home. Then we turn our attention to the Council, not to destroy them but to break them, to show them and every species in the galaxy what happens when you betray humanity." "And after that?" another officer asked. "After that," Morrow said quietly, "we build something new, something that will never allow another species to decide our fate. But that comes later. First, there must be a reckoning. First, they must pay for what they did." The officers saluted and departed to make final preparations. Morrow remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars that humanity had once viewed with such innocent wonder. Tomorrow the shroud would fall. Tomorrow the Black Armada would emerge. Tomorrow the galaxy would learn that humanity was not a species to be sacrificed. Tomorrow the silence would end. And what came after would shake the foundations of civilizations 100,000 years old. The young species that the Council had dismissed as expendable was about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Humanity was coming, and they had brought their anger with them. The veil falls. Commander Thexrel was drinking his morning stimulant when his sensor officer started screaming. The young Valanthe was pointing at his console with shaking hands, his scales turning the pale color of absolute terror. Thexrel rushed over and looked at the readings, and the cup fell from his grip. The electromagnetic shroud around the Sol system was collapsing, not failing in random patches the way a natural phenomenon would, but retracting in perfect geometric patterns like a curtain being deliberately pulled aside. And behind that curtain was something that made Thexrel's heart stop beating for several seconds. Ships. More ships than he had ever seen in his life. More ships than existed in the entire conquered fleet. They filled the void like a metal ocean, stretching across millions of kilometers in formations so precise they looked like they had been painted on the stars. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons hung in the darkness. Carrier vessels larger than cities disgorged swarms of fighters that registered on sensors as asteroid fields. Destroyer groups moved in perfect synchronization, their weapons already charging. "By the first ones," Thexrel whispered, "send a transmission to Concord Command immediately. Tell them the humans are not dead. Tell them." His communication officer shook her head frantically. "Our signals are being jammed, Commander. I cannot reach anyone outside the system." A new signal cut through the static, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. A human face appeared on every screen in the blockade fleet, an older male with gray hair and eyes like frozen steel. He wore a black uniform with no decoration except a simple Earth emblem on his chest. "This is Admiral Kenji Morrow of the Human Black Fleet," the man said, his voice calm and cold. "To all conquered vessels in Sol space, you have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender. Any ship that fails to comply will be destroyed. There will be no second warning." Thexrel looked at his tactical officer. "Can we fight them?" The tactical officer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Commander, they outnumber us 400 to 1, and their ships are not the primitive vessels we were expecting. I am reading weapon signatures that our database does not even recognize." The 60 seconds passed. Most of the conquered ships surrendered. A few tried to run. They died in brilliant flashes of light that were over before anyone could even scream. The Black Fleet's weapons were surgical and devastating, destroying targets with a precision that spoke of years of preparation. Commander Thexrel watched from his bridge as human Marines boarded his vessel. They moved like ghosts, silent and efficient, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. They took control of his ship in minutes without firing a single shot. When they removed their helmets, Thexrel expected to see anger or hatred. Instead, he saw something worse. He saw nothing. Their eyes were empty of emotion, focused only on the task before them. "What have you become?" he asked the young human officer who took his surrender. The officer looked at him with those terrible empty eyes. "What you made us," she replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." News of the Black Fleet's emergence spread across the galaxy at the speed of panic. The Conquered's leadership assembled in emergency session, demanding explanations that no one could provide. How had humanity built such an armada in secret? Where had they obtained such advanced technology? What were their intentions? The Drakkari swarm provided the answer to the last question. They had been moving their forward hives towards Sol in preparation for the resettlement when the shroud fell. They found themselves face to face with a fleet that had been designed specifically to destroy them. Admiral Morrow gave no speeches before the first engagement. He simply transmitted targeting coordinates to his fleet and gave the order to advance. The Battle of the Outer Markers lasted 6 hours, and when it ended, the Drakkari forward armada had ceased to exist. 2 billion insectoid warriors died in the cold void between stars, their hive ships burning like funeral pyres. The Swarm Queen received news of the defeat and immediately ordered a full mobilization. The Drakkari had conquered 17 worlds. They had never known defeat. They believed this was an anomaly, a lucky strike that would not be repeated. They were wrong. The Black Fleet moved through Drakkari space like a disease, systematic and unstoppable. They did not negotiate. They did not accept surrenders. They did not take prisoners. World after world fell silent as humanity erased the species that had been promised their home. Admiral Morrow watched the destruction from his flagship, the Remembrance, a dreadnought named for what humanity would never forget. His officers brought him reports of each victory, and he acknowledged them with simple nods. There was no celebration. There was no glory. There was only the cold satisfaction of a promise being kept. On the Drakkari breeding world of Kethril Prime, the last queen made a desperate transmission to the Council of 12. "You told us they were weak," she screamed across the void. "You told us they would not resist. You gave us a world of warriors and called them prey." The Council did not respond. They were too busy trying to save themselves. Young Lieutenant James Okafor flew sortie after sortie against the swarm, his fighter cutting through enemy formations with deadly precision. He thought about his mother's tears. He thought about the childhood stolen from his generation. He thought about the council chamber and the Archon's words. Every trigger pull was an answer to years of helpless rage. "This is for Earth," he whispered as another hive ship broke apart before him. "This is for everyone who trusted you." In 3 months, the Drakkari swarm was functionally extinct. Their hive worlds burned. Their queens were dead. Their species existed only in historical records and genetic archives that humanity kept as trophies. The Council had offered Earth to monsters, and humanity had erased those monsters from existence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. This was not the humanity they remembered. The eager young species that had joined the conquered with open hearts and dreams of friendship was gone. In its place stood something harder, colder, forged in betrayal and tempered by a decade of preparation. Admiral Morrow addressed the galaxy from the ruins of the Drakkari throne world. His message was broadcast to every inhabited planet in the known universe. To the Council of 12, he said, his voice carrying across light years, "You believed you could sacrifice us without consequence. You believed we would accept extinction with dignity. You were wrong. The Drakkari are gone. They will never threaten anyone again, but our work is not finished. We remember who sold us to the swarm. We remember who called us expendable. We are coming for you now. Not to destroy you. Destruction would be too merciful. We are coming to teach you what it means to face a species that has nothing left to lose." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was ice. "Pray to whatever gods you believe in. They cannot save you, but perhaps they can give you comfort in the darkness that is coming." The transmission ended. The galaxy held its breath, and the Black Fleet turned its attention toward the citadel of voices, toward the 12 ancient species that had condemned humanity to death, toward the reckoning that had been 10 years in the making. The reckoning. The Council of 12 shattered like glass dropped from a great height. The moment humanity's fleet began its advance toward the core systems, ancient alliances that had held for millennia dissolved into panic and self-preservation. 3 species immediately broadcast messages of surrender, claiming they had opposed the original vote to sacrifice Earth. Their ambassadors spoke of secret dissent and private objections, though no evidence of such objections had ever been recorded. Admiral Morrow received these surrenders without comment. He did not believe the claims of hidden resistance, but he accepted the surrenders anyway. Every species that bent the knee was one less obstacle between humanity and its true targets. The Black Fleet passed through their systems without firing a shot, leaving behind only a garrison and a warning. 2 other species attempted to flee the galaxy entirely. The Crystalline Consciousness and the Void Singers both possessed technology capable of intergalactic travel, and they calculated that running was safer than facing what humanity had become. They launched their Exodus fleets in secret, hopping to escape before the humans arrived. They underestimated how thoroughly humanity had studied their enemies. Black Fleet interceptor groups were waiting at every jump point. The fleeing species found themselves surrounded and helpless, their great arc ships forced to power down and accept human inspection teams aboard. "We simply wanted to leave," the Consciousness Prime transmitted. "We posed no threat to you. Why pursue us?" The human commander who boarded their flagship was a woman named Captain Yuki Tanaka. She stood before the crystalline being without fear or mercy. "Because you voted to feed us to monsters," she said. "Because you looked at 8 billion innocent lives and decided we were acceptable losses. You do not get to escape the consequences of that choice. No one does." The remaining 7 council species chose to fight. They gathered their fleets at the homeworld of the Velanthi Dominion, the same species whose Archon had first proposed humanity's sacrifice. It was fitting, Morrow thought, that the final battle would happen there. The Archon himself had demanded the honor of commanding the Allied defense. The combined conquered fleet numbered over 8,000 ships, crewed by warriors from species that had mastered interstellar warfare when humanity was still living in caves. They had millennia of tactical experience, advanced technology, and the desperation of beings fighting for their very existence. Admiral Morrow brought half of his fleet. He wanted the Council to know that humanity did not need overwhelming numbers to defeat them. He wanted them to understand the depth of their miscalculation. The Battle of Velanthi Prime began at dawn according to the homeworld's time, and it would be remembered as the bloodiest engagement in galactic history. Conquered ships fought with surprising ferocity, their crews knowing that this was their last chance to stop the human advance. They used every weapon in their arsenal. including several that had been banned by treaties humanity had never been invited to sign. Lieutenant James Ockafer led a fighter wing against a Velanthi carrier group. His squadron had been reduced to half strength in the first hour of combat, and the survivors were exhausted and running low on ammunition. But they pressed on anyway, because surrender had never been taught to them, because they carried the weight of every human who had ever dreamed of seeing the stars and been told they were worthless. For Earth, Ockafer shouted as he dove toward the carrier's bridge, for everyone they murdered. His missiles struck true and the carrier began to break apart. He pulled away at the last second, his fighter's hull groaning from the stress. Another victory, another debt repaid. On the Remembrance, Admiral Morrow directed the battle with cold precision. He had spent 10 years planning for this moment, running simulations and studying enemy tactics. Every move the conquered fleet made, he had anticipated. Every strategy they attempted, he had a counter prepared. It was not a fair fight. Fairness had died in the council chamber when humanity was sentenced to extinction. The Archon's flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Dominion, fought its way toward the Remembrance through waves of human ships. The Serpentine leader was determined to face Morrow personally, to defeat the human admiral in single combat and turn the tide of the battle. It was the kind of dramatic gesture that the Velanthi loved. Morrow let him come. When the Eternal Dominion was within weapons range, he opened a direct communication channel. "Archon," Morrow said, his face appearing on the alien screens, "you once told our ambassador that humanity was expendable, that our sacrifice would buy peace for the galaxy. Do you remember those words?" The Archon's image was disheveled, his scales dulled with stress and fear. "You cannot win, human. Even if you destroy us here, the galaxy will unite against you. You will become the monsters you claim to fight." "Perhaps," Morrow acknowledged, "but we will be alive and you will not." He cut the transmission and gave the order. The Remembrance's main batteries fired, and the Eternal Dominion vanished in a cascade of nuclear fire. The Archon who had condemned humanity died without dignity, without final words, without even time to scream. The Council fleet collapsed after that. Their morale had been built on the assumption of their own superiority, and watching their greatest leader die so easily shattered that assumption completely. Ships began surrendering in waves, their crews throwing down weapons and begging for mercy. Morrow granted that mercy, though part of him wanted to burn them all. He was not a monster. He refused to become one. But he also refused to forget. When the battle ended, 11 hours after it began, humanity controlled the orbitals of every council homeworld. Their fleets were destroyed or captured. Their leaders were dead or imprisoned. The ancient order that had ruled the galaxy for 100,000 years had been broken in a single day. Admiral Morrow stood on the surface of Velanthi Prime, in the grand plaza where the Archon had once addressed his people. Millions of Velanthi watched from windows and screens, waiting to learn their fate. They expected genocide. They expected their cities to burn and their children to die. It was what they would have done. Instead, Morrow activated a planetary broadcast and spoke words that no one had anticipated. "The Council of 12 is dissolved," he said. "The species that voted to sacrifice humanity will live under our supervision until we determine they can be trusted. Your worlds will not be destroyed. Your people will not be enslaved. Your children will grow up and have children of their own." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We are not you. We do not measure the worth of civilizations by their age or their power. We do not throw away innocent lives for political convenience. You believed us weak because we chose peace. You believed us expendable because we were young. You were wrong." His voice hardened. "But understand this. We will never forget what you did. For 10,000 generations, your descendants will learn about the betrayal. They will understand the price of treachery, and they will know that humanity is watching, always watching, ready to act if the lesson is ever forgotten." The broadcast ended. The galaxy processed what it had witnessed. Humanity had defeated the most powerful alliance in known history. They had every right to become conquerors, to build an empire on the ashes of their enemies. Instead, they chose something else, something the Council could never have predicted, something that would reshape civilization more thoroughly than any war. They chose to let the galaxy live, and in doing so, they proved they were better than those who had betrayed them. The long shadow. 50 years had passed since the reckoning, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. The Council of 12 was gone, replaced by the Assembly of Equals, a governing body where every species had a voice, and no one could be sacrificed for political convenience. Humanity held permanent veto power in this assembly, a constant reminder of what happened when civilizations forgot their basic principles. The citadel of voices still floated between its dying stars, but now it served a different purpose. It had been transformed into the memorial of the betrayal, a museum and monument where visitors from across the galaxy came to learn about the darkest chapter in their collective history. Holographic displays showed the original council session, where humanity had been condemned. Recordings of the war played on endless loops. Statues of human soldiers stood in the Great Chamber, where ambassadors once argued for genocide. Kira Velith was a young Valanthi historian, barely 30 years old, born long after her people's defeat. She had grown up with the weight of her species' shame, taught from childhood that her ancestors had committed an unforgivable crime. Now she had traveled to Earth itself to understand the species that had spared her people. She expected to find a civilization built on anger, monuments to vengeance on every corner, a population that lived only to remember the wrongs done to them. She was prepared for hostility and suspicion. She was prepared to be treated as the descendant of enemies. What she found surprised her completely. Earth was beautiful. The great cities combined human architecture with alien designs from a dozen different species. Parks stretched across continents where children of multiple races played together. Universities welcomed students from every corner of the galaxy. The streets were filled with humans and aliens walking side by side, speaking in a mixture of languages, building lives together. Kira walked through the memorial gardens in the city once called New York, where 12 black pillars stood in a circle, each one representing a council species that had voted for humanity's extinction. Around these pillars, people had left flowers and messages, not of hatred but of reflection. "We forgive but do not forget," one note read. "Let this be the last betrayal in our galaxy." Admiral Kenji Morrow was still alive, though barely. He was 97 years old, confined to a care facility in the mountains of Japan. His body had failed him long ago, but his mind remained sharp. When Kira requested an interview, she expected to be refused. Instead, a message came back within hours. The Admiral would see her. She found him in a garden overlooking a valley filled with cherry blossoms. He was small and frail, wrapped in blankets against a chill that seemed to exist only for him. But his eyes were the same eyes she had seen in historical footage, cold and calculating, the eyes of a man who had burned worlds. "You are the first Valanthi to request an interview," Morrow said as she sat beside him. "I wondered when one of your people would finally come." "I am writing a history of the war," Kira explained, her translator converting her words into perfect Japanese. "I want to understand what happened, not just the battles but the choices. I want to know why humanity showed mercy when you had every reason to destroy us." Morrow was silent for a long time, watching the cherry blossoms fall. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had expected. "I have asked myself that question for 50 years, he said. "When we planned the reckoning, there were many who argued for complete annihilation. The Drakhari had been destroyed without hesitation. Why should the council species be treated differently? They had ordered our extinction. They deserved to suffer the same fate." "But you disagreed," Kira said. "I did not disagree," Morrow replied. "Part of me wanted to burn your worlds." Part of me wanted your people to feel the same fear we felt when we learned we had been sold to monsters. I was so angry, young historian. Anger was all I had left for 10 years. It kept me alive when nothing else could. He turned to look at her, and she saw something unexpected in those ancient eyes. Not coldness, but sorrow. But revenge is easy. Anyone can destroy. We had proven that against the Drakhari. The harder question was what kind of species we wanted to become. Did we want to build our future on hatred and blood? Did we want our children to inherit a galaxy where might was the only law? Your people had been hurt so badly, Kira said. How could you think of anything else? We thought of our children, Morrow answered. The generation that grew up during the Dark Decade, they knew nothing but preparation for war. They learned to hate before they learned to love. We stole their innocence because we had no choice. But when the war was over, we had a choice. We could give the next generation a better universe, or we could trap them in the same cycle of vengeance forever. He sighed, and for a moment he looked every one of his 97 years. We showed the galaxy what we were capable of at our worst. The destruction of the Drakhari, the defeat of the Council, those were necessary evils. But they were still evils. Every day since then, we have tried to show what we can be at our best. Not because we forgot our anger, but because we refused to let it define us. Kira felt tears forming in her eyes. My people are taught that humanity is to be feared, that you are watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake so you can finish what you started. Morrow shook his head slowly. We are not waiting for you to fail. We are hoping you will succeed. The assembly of equals exists because we believe every species deserves a chance to prove itself, even the species that tried to kill us. How? Kira asked. How can you forgive us? Forgiveness is a process, not an event, Morrow said. We have not fully forgiven your people, perhaps we never will, but we have chosen to live alongside you anyway. We have chosen to build instead of destroy. We have chosen hope over hatred, even when hatred would be easier. He reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but warm. Write your history, young Valanthe. Tell the truth about what happened. Tell your people that humanity remembers, but also tell them that remembering does not mean surrendering to the past. Tell them that we are still learning how to be the species we want to become, and tell them that they can learn too. Kira returned home and wrote her book. It took 3 years and became the most widely read work in Valanthe history. She called it The Sleeping Giant, Why the Galaxy Must Never Wake Humanity Again. But the message of the book was not what anyone expected. It was not a warning about human military power or vengeance. It was a meditation on mercy and transformation, on the possibility of moving beyond betrayal into something new. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy changed in ways both subtle and profound. Species that had warred for millennia found ways to coexist. Ancient grudges were slowly healed. The cycle of revenge and conquest that had defined galactic civilization for 100,000 years began to break. And through it all, humanity stood as both reminder and example. Reminder of what happened when civilizations betrayed each other. Example of what was possible when they chose not to. The sleeping giant remained awake, watching the galaxy it had once threatened to destroy. But now its strength was dedicated to building instead of burning. No one would ever test humanity again, but more importantly, no one would ever need to. The betrayal was over, the reckoning had passed, and what remained was the long, difficult, beautiful work of creating something better. That was humanity's true victory, not the wars they had won, but the peace they had chosen to keep.